Good morning, everybody. Happy Labor Day. How is everybody doing? Whoa! That is what I'm talking about. A little enthusiasm, some excitement. If you're new here for the first time, you probably haven't heard me talk about my cousin Ozzy. He lives in a small Norwegian community up in Nunda, South Dakota, and he's kind of a bucolic, rudimentary type person. Not real refined in the social skills of life, but still he has a good time. And he recently went to Chicago to get a taste of the big city. He had never been any place bigger than Kansas City. And while he was there, I think he got a little bit carried away and maybe overdid it. He caroused all the bars. He stayed out all night. He drank way more than he should have. He hooked up with several different people. And he ended up the night sleeping on the bench by the bus stop. Well, the bus comes in the morning. Ozzy gets up, drags himself up the steps, lumbers down the aisle, and the only seat empty is sitting next to a priest. So he sits down next to the priest, and he's got a pint of vodka sticking out of his pocket. The priest looks at him and gives him kind of a humph of indignation and goes about his business. Ozzy doesn't care. He picks up a newspaper somebody left and just reads about the current events. Well, it wasn't long before Ozzy turned to the priest and said, "Father, can you help me? What causes arthritis, indigestion, and tremors?" And the priest says, "Let me tell you, my son, carousing bars at night, not taking care of your hygiene, not getting enough sleep, and hanging out with certain people causes those things." Well, some time went by, and pretty soon the priest turned to Ozzy and said, "Would you like to be healed of your ailments?" And Ozzy says, "Oh, no, I don't have those ailments. I was just reading in the newspaper that the Pope does." Okay. Today I am going to talk about sin. You know, the Christian church, when it first started taking off, they got way carried away with this sinfulness stuff. Everything became a sin. People didn't know whether to stand up, sit down, fall forward, or fall back. Everything was a sin, and it got to the point where people just didn't pay that much attention to what the church said was sinful and what the church said wasn't, because everything was sinful. So Pope Gregory in the 6th century decided to bring this down to a more realistic approach, and he declared 7 sins, also known as the 7 cardinal sins, or the 7 deadly sins, or the 7 grand sins. And he put them out there, and this is what they were. The first one, and they're listed in an order of not so bad of a sin to really, really bad. And the first one is lust, which we can all be thankful that that's down on the list. And if we if we do happen to engage from time to time, that is not that big of a deal. The second one is gluttony. The third one is greed. The fourth one is, I always forget this because I want to. Anyway, I'll get back to that. Anger, envy, sloth. That's it. The one I missed was sloth. But the sin at the top that is claimed to be the worst sin of all is pride. And I take exception to that because I don't think pride is a sin at all. But there's a story behind it. And it involves a story, a myth about Lucifer, God's number 1 angel. When God made Adam and Eve, he commanded all of the angels to respect human beings, to love human beings, and to treat them as equal. Well, Lucifer, the number 1 angel, wouldn't do that. He said they were made from dirt. I've been around for ages. They just came on the scene. I will not consider them an equal. And he started rounding up a lot of other angels as well to join in on this rebellion. Well, God would have nothing to do with it, so he threw the whole bunch out and only saved the angels that would see the human beings as being equal. Well, Lucifer went on a campaign to recruit people, human beings. Naturally, the only ones he had at that point were Adam and Eve. And so they say he filled them with pride so that they would take a fruit off the forbidden tree. He filled them with pride so they began to think that they were just as good as God, except and they needed the fruit in order to gain God's knowledge. And that was called the fall. The fall from purity to the fall of sinfulness. And the story is perpetuated by the fact that since Adam and Eve were the first people in the world, and since that everybody else has come forth from Adam and Eve, they call it Adam's strain, or today we'd say it's his DNA genetics. All of us have that Adamic strain within us, and so we're all sinners, just because Adam and Eve sinned. Now, the point I'm trying to make is the church took the position, none of this happened until the 6th century, okay? Jesus never, ever called people sinners. He lifted them up. He said, you are the light of the world. He said, treat yourself well. Love yourself. God has created you, and you are perfect in every way. But 600 years later, the people were leaving the church. They were feeling good about themselves. They didn't need church to live a good life. And the church got concerned, so they decided that they had to dispel this notion of people feeling good about themselves, and pride was a way to do that. If you feel good about yourself, if you feel good about your life, you are prideful, and that is a sin. And it says in the Bible, God does not like prideful people. God hates prideful people. Pride goeth before a fall. And so this campaign began to impress upon the people that it's not good to feel good about yourself. And we've kind of been going around that same old track, that same old cycle ever since. In most churches today that are still of the fundamental mode or the traditional mode, you're going to discover that the primary verses in their creed are, you are sinful by nature, and that you are unworthy in the eyes of God. Well, pride, the word itself, didn't even come about until, I believe it's the 12th century. And so pride wasn't in the Bible before it was translated. The word that was used in the Bible to describe this sin was something that meant conceit or arrogance or self-glorification above others. But it wasn't necessarily pride. From that, we ended up with two versions of pride. The first version of pride is bad pride. And bad pride is always dependent upon a comparison. You have to compare yourself to another person in order to feel good about yourself and put the other person down. If I want to feel good about myself with bad pride, I need to put somebody else down in order for me to be lifted up to a higher level. That is bad pride. That is conceit. That is arrogance. That is self-glorification. Good pride is exactly the opposite. Good pride is all internal. It doesn't involve anything else but you. Bad pride is external. It calls for something out there to be compared to. Good pride is internal. It's just me, and it's just me alone. I feel good about my life, not compared to anybody else's. Just because I have life, I'm proud of it. I take pride in my life. I take pride in my lifestyle most of the time. Good pride, I think, is essential to well-being. Good pride is not only something that we can engage ourselves in, but also it's our responsibility. It's your responsibility to feel good about yourself. It's your responsibility to feel good about your life, even in the most difficult of times. It's your responsibility to be proud of who you are without comparison to anyone else. Now, there's a fellow named Murray Banks, and he was a professor of psychology at Long Island University. And he'd go around the country doing motivational talks. And at each talk, he would pass out index cards to the people in the audience. He would ask them to put a number from 1 to 10 on the card, and that number represented how they felt about themselves, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst. Well, he said in doing this dozens and dozens of times, most of the time, 6s and 7s were held up in the cards. Occasionally, maybe an 8, occasionally a 3 or 4, but in most cases, a 6 or a 7. Well, one time he was doing this talk, he passed out index cards, asked people to write a number on the card and hold it up, and lo and behold, for the first time ever, there he saw a 10. And it almost led him to the point where he lost track of his talk because he didn't know what to think. And even more important was the 10 was being held up by a little girl in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy. He couldn't understand it. So after the talk, he went down, he searched her out, and he said, I noticed that you held up a 10. Tell me, how did you arrive at that conclusion? And the little girl coined the phrase that most of you have probably heard of, God doesn't make junk. And what she was saying is all of God's creation is perfect, and I am part of God's creation, and I am perfect. Now, the big difference between her and the rest of the audience, and there's over 1,000 people there, everybody else in rating themselves was using some sort of a comparison to somebody else. Well, I'm a 6, I guess, compared to somebody that might be a 10. Or I am a 2, I guess, compared to all those people that are better than me. Everybody else used a comparison to determine their net worth, or not net worth, but self-worth, except for the little girl. And she had no comparisons. She couldn't compare herself to anybody. She was just happy in herself and of herself and prideful of the fact that she was and that she could do what she could do and that she could even be there at the talk. Now, most of us have dealt with low self-esteem issues in the past. Most of us had feelings of inferiority. Most of us at times have a low level of worth. And I think self-pride or self-appreciation in the world today is woefully low. Somehow we've gotten caught in this cycle of it's okay to not feel good about me. Now you think about that. Your life began, your life ends. In between it is your life path. You're walking down it. Do you want as your pathmate somebody that you do not feel good about, or somebody that you do not like, or somebody that you think is unworthy of the path? No, of course not. You want to feel good about yourself, and you want to feel good about your path through life. I want to introduce you to a fellow named Sam Byrne, and you find him on the front page of the bulletin. Kathy, can you zoom in on this so that our other people can see it? I want the people out there to see it. Anyway, Sam is just an incredible fellow. I ran across him earlier this week. He had done an interview for HBO because he has a disease that makes him age more rapidly than other people, about 5 times faster. And they did a HBO documentary on him. Then he also did a TED Talk. And I saw him on the TED Talk. And here he was. Most people with this disease die around 12 or 13. At this point, Sam was 17. And he was talking about his life. And the question was, how can you feel good about yourself or feel good about your life in a world that is totally different for everybody else? And the first thing out of his mouth was, I want you to know that I'm happy, that I have a happy life. And the interviewer said, well, tell us, what is your secret? And he said, first of all, I don't focus on the things that I can't do. I focus on what I can do. And I can do so much. I find great enjoyment all the time. He said, I once wanted to be in the marching band at high school. And the snare drum weighed 40 pounds with the harness, and I weighed 50 pounds. It was an impossibility. So the coach said, well, we'll let you play the timpanis, the big kettle drums, and we'll put them on the side of the football field. And we'll get you a little stand that you can stand on, and you can play the drums with the marching band. He said, no, I want to march. So Sam, on his own, searched out an engineer, told him the story. The engineer built him a snare drum that weighed 7 pounds. And at the homecoming football game, he was out there on the field with his drum playing. He said, I can do so much more than I ever thought I could do, and I take great joy in what I can do, and I don't worry about the rest. The second thing he said is I hang around with people that I enjoy being around. I hang around with people that make me feel good. And he said, I have been teased, I've been pushed around, I've been talked about and gossiped. He said, people look at me in a strange way when I walk down the street. None of that bothers me because I have such a strong group of supporters that love me, that's where I spend my time with them. And he said, the third thing is, I'm always moving forward. Always looking for something new to engage myself in. Always trying to learn something new. Always trying to discover some potential within me that has remained a secret up to this point. And that keeps me excited about the fact that there's so much more that I can do. The New England Patriots heard about Sam. They heard that he is one of their biggest fans. So they invited him to one of their playoff games. And during halftime, they were going to give him this beautiful award for the best fan ever. Unfortunately, he died the night before. But he died, according to his parents, he died happy. Once again, Sam's happiness wasn't based on how other people looked, how other people felt, what things other people could do. It was all about him. He had no comparisons. It was an internal sense of pride about himself and not an external pride where he would find every single reason to not feel good about himself and to not feel good about his life if he looked around the world and started comparing himself to those things. Now, I would like all of us today to just take a step, a giant step, out of that circle of self-degradation and self-depreciation and negative self-thoughts and feelings, and understand that we can feel good about ourselves. It's not a sin. We can feel good about the life we're living, no matter how it is going at the time. We can feel good about the person that we are. Stop and think about it. All the things that you've been through in your life. Incredibly difficult things. Everybody here has been in jams. Everybody here has had problems. Everybody here has huge challenges that they've had to overcome. Everybody, but here you are, you made it through. Feel proud about that. Everybody here has engaged in relationships and developed friends and had close support groups of people that loved you. They loved you, not because you were paying them money or because you demanded they love you. They loved you. Feel good about that. Feel proud of yourself for that. Take pride in yourself and in your life. That, I believe, is what God wants. That's what the universe wants. No complaints about, this is me, look at them. So as we move into meditation, I just want you to go inward and find that internal sense of pride. And it starts with, after all, I feel good about myself. I am a good person. And I can move forward and live a good life. We'll now move into meditation. Thank you.